As people are coming in, I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. Please make sure to mute your lines. We'll have time for question and answers in the end, but you can also ask a question by typing it in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please close any other applications or windows that you are not using to conserve bandwidth. And the webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our website by next week. I am super excited to introduce our presenters. Dr. Patel is an associate professor and clinician educator in the Department of Medicine at the University of Texas Medical Branch. She earned an MD degree from UTMB and completed her residency and internship from the Warren Alpert School of Brown University. She has received accreditation through the American Academy of HIV Medicine as an HIV specialist. She also holds a master's degree in human rights from the London School of Economics. Her scholarly work has focused on HIV primary care, social determinants of health, LGBTQI+ care, and innovations in clinical skills development and medical education. This work has earned her a regional and national reputation as an expert in the integration of issues such as poverty, racism, and health inequities into the medical curriculum. She is also a faculty Osler Scholar in the John P. McGovern Academy of Oslerian Medicine and has received several awards and honors for her work in curricular development, individual teaching, educational scholarship, and student group mentorship. Dr. Nadia Ahmed is an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Texas Medical Branch with a focus on community medicine and medical education. In this role, she cares for patients in community safety net clinics and is heavily involved in undergraduate medical education. She completed her bachelor's degree in biology at the University of Texas at Dallas. She earned her medical degree, completed internal medicine residency, and a chief resident year, all at UTMB. Currently, she serves as co-director of the Mindfully Evolving, Thriving and Advocating course, which motivates first-year medical students to adopt a holistic view of care while approaching the role that determinants of health, such as poverty, class, and racism, play in the health systems. And with that, I will kick it over to you both.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that amazing introduction. Good afternoon, almost afternoon for some of you. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. As Claire mentioned, both Dr. Ahmed and I are heavily involved in undergraduate medical education and are excited to be with you today. We're going to be talking about a way that we have incorporated to contextualize the social determinants of health for our students. We call this lived experience panels, and this is going to be a little bit of us sharing what we've done and then also wanting to get input and guidance from everybody in education as to what you all have been doing. So over the next hour or so, first I want to start with the literature at incorporating patient stories in health professions education, especially with respect to the different roles that patients can have and the underlying theories that inform their inclusion. Then delve into our experience of incorporating what we're calling lived experience panels into undergraduate medical education, though this is something that's transferable to other health professions education as well. And then provide some scaffolding of lessons learned, some best practices from us doing this over the past 4 years. And then really want to hear from all of you about your own experiences and what we can collectively learn from this community of educators here. So let's start with the broad social determinants of health view. I know this is preaching to the choir here, but for anybody that's new to this, these are kind of the non-medical factors that influence health outcomes. So these are the conditions in which people are born, live, work, play, age, and the wider set of forces that systems that drive those types of conditions of daily life. And these can include economic policies and systems, social norms, social policies, development agendas, and span political systems and big, broad issues like race, racism, climate change. This is the CDC Social Determinants of Health framework, and it attempts to show some of the complexity in terms of the level of impact. On the left here, you can see individual level of impact on the bottom. And as you go towards addressing things that are more systemic, the level of community impact increases. And really our challenge as health professions education is really to frame social determinants in a way that is accessible to our students, provides multiple opportunities for engagement, allows for the time and the ability for paradigm shifts in perspectives and how they see their current and future roles as healthcare professionals in their professional identity formation, and really trying to also build some of those practical skills that they're going to need in addressing social determinants of health. So that's a pretty complicated task that's incredibly difficult to accomplish with any one particular modality. So we need as many tools in our curricular toolkit to utilize. And by the way, we also want standardization in these type of curricular activities and objectives and robust assessments. And the social determinants of education field is not quite there outside of expert consensus. Okay, there we go. I'm just trying to move the slide along. So let's look at the type of teaching strategies that are employed for integrating social determinants of health curricular content into health professions education. This is a study from the American Medical Association's Accelerating Change in Medical Education Consortium. They developed a 23-item inventory survey to document consortium school social determinants of health curricula. Some of you may have actually been a part of this study. The 32 consortium medical school, schools were invited to participate, and this is what they found. The social determinants of health content and delivery really were wide spanning. What it looked like was anything from the integration of particular case studies with patient scenarios related to social determinants of health. Virtual patients were utilized as well with the same kind of case-based scenarios. Sometimes there would be teaching in the electronic health record with social determinants of health, patient-related scenarios. Community-based service or research that could be in the context of a formal community service learning thread or theme, or it could just be a one-off. Students also would conduct social determinants of health needs assessments, whether that's based on real patients in a clinical environment or home-based assessments, case-based or virtual as well. And some schools were utilizing history-taking schools. Many of you are likely familiar with the social determinants of health, financial screening tools, food insecurity screening tools, kind of giving students the experience of being able to use these tools and the familiarity of it. There were some integrated interprofessional experiences. Guests from local community-based organizations would also come in to give a broad landscape of this is the community, this is the community needs, this is the landscape of what's going on, these are the resources that are available. And then a host of different documentaries, books, films that explored issues related to social determinants of health. Again, this is not a comprehensive list because only 32 schools participated, but it does give you kind of a flavor of the kind of activities that were used here. And you could see there's a huge amount of variety here. Okay. One of the additional modalities that we wanted to highlight with this webinar is kind of the concept of lived experience panels. This is not a new concept, but something that's been around for a very long time, but has been implemented in to a variable degree. And the way that we're kind of defining lived experience panel is integrating real life experience and stories of patients in their own words, really having the patients be the own drivers of their narrative and given the time and the space to talk very freely and openly about their own experiences. If we zoom out from the social determinants of health education literature, we really see a confluence of ideas and literature that are connected to this idea of elevating and centering the patient voice in health professions education. There's actually even more topics than what's included here, but I just wanted to focus on the ones that might be more important for this webinar. So starting with social terms of health, but kind of at the core, the patient story helps to humanize the numbers and the statistics, the policies, the actual really impact of the social determinants of health at an individual level. So we can't let our students lose sight of that. The hidden curriculum, those are the unintended learning experiences, whether they are the beliefs, the values, the norms, really like kind of the culture that they are embedded in, whether that's at the class level, the school level, the institution level, that can sometimes run counter to the formal learning that we're attempting to do. And this hidden curriculum is at play with, frankly, we all know, undermining the importance of social determinants of health in health professions and in health professions education. The idea of this is not your lane, stick to the biomedical lane. And part of that is a culture that resists true person or patient-centered care. So those two things are linked, that the patient isn't the expert in themselves and is somehow an entity to be acted on and not a partner in their care. We also know that empathy and compassion that our learners have starts off incredibly high, and then during the course of their training, especially as well documented among medical students, does tend to decrease. And that blunted response can also mute the desire to center patient experience and lean into the social determinants of health. And lastly, patients as teachers. So this is the idea that patients are experts in their own experience, and giving students a glimpse into that inner and outer life can be immensely invaluable. There are a few theoretical concepts that also dovetail with the idea of centering patient voice. These, for anybody that's that loves theory, this was really interesting for me as well, that there are multiple theories where patient as teacher, especially in the way that we're conceiving it, can really lend a powerful lens with which to look at what's happening with the learner-patient interaction. So first is transformative learning, that you have an experience that fundamentally changes your frame of reference. This is where, when we think about an experience that a student has that has the potential to be paradigm shifting, this is really what we're thinking about, right? It challenges beliefs, assumptions in a fundamental way, causes some conflict, some cognitive dissonance, and requires that critical reflection. This process can be quite long, and it isn't quite sequential. So it could be that early on in the curriculum, there are opportunities to plant the seeds of this, but they may only grow to fruition a little later on in the curriculum, or a little later on in the years of their training. The other kind of related concept is legitimate peripheral participation. So this is the process of how somebody that is new to a community starts on the periphery of that community. And then as they start acquiring the skills, the knowledge, they start gaining acceptance into the center of that community. So if you think about this from the perspective of a first-year medical student, they start off at the periphery, so not on the outside, but they're right at the inside, kind of looking in, but they're not in the middle, where fully fledged, doctors who are full members of that community are in. So as they learn the knowledge, the skills, the culture of the core members, they slowly gain acceptance and move into that center core. And this can also place them at odds or in opposition to some of the patient-centered, person-centeredness that we also want to teach them, and to cue into social determinants to really lean into their patients. So this can cause discomfort. The third theory is dramaturgy theory. This is Goffman's theory, where literally the world's a stage and everybody is a performer. You're either a director, an actor, a prop, the audience, and at any given time, someone is playing a role. And so in this theory, the interactions are viewed as an elaborate theater. Everyone has a particular role, and these roles can shift and change. For example, say the charge nurse can alternate between being the role of the director, kind of looking and orchestrating, to the performer being in front of a patient, to an audience member. And students generally are in the role of either performer or audience. So what does that mean for the patient? They're viewing the patient as sometimes a prop to be acted upon. Again, that's just a different way of being able to look at this, and where centering the voice of the patient disrupts that those roles. And then lastly, critical medical humanities, of which I'm a huge fan, where we're really looking at not only the biomedical experience, but the experience of illness, the experience of what it means to live with a condition, a disease, from the perspective of the individual that's experiencing it, knowing that insight into that is only giving us an N of one insight. And part of the value of this is looking at it not through a lens of the medical gaze of medicalizing and looking at the patient through like a deficiency lens, but also being able to look at ways in which our systems medicalize things, and the way in which our systems might be contributing to some of the inequities that we see, which is also related to social determinants. Sorry, I'm not pressing hard enough. Okay, there we go. So the literature on patients as teachers has looked at different roles for patients. Commonly at many of our institutions, we see patients being recruited for roles like standardized patients or simulated patients, where students are learning physical exam techniques or history taking communication. The other role is home visits, especially if this is part of community service learning. What we're referring to when we're talking about lived experience panels is patients actually talking about their own stories. So it's more these last two bullets, individual patient stories, where we're getting a glimpse into the realities of like living with the particular disease from their own perspective. There are also life event charts and art that narratives that patients can write that give learners a lot more perspective as well. But when we're talking about lived experience panels, we're really talking about patients talking about their own experiences. And what the literature says about this in terms of the outcomes is that for students, this can be an incredibly powerful learning experience, really irrespective of the setting, whether it's in the classroom, the home, the community, and that it allows the students to understand their perspective, and it contrasts just the dry book learning that they're having, because now they're connecting it with an actual human being. It provides that relevance and context. From the patient perspective, there are actually really great outcomes looking at improved self-esteem, empowerment of actually being able to take ownership over their own narrative, and wanting to help future patients have maybe a different kind of experience than the one that they had, being able to educate future healthcare professionals, and being able to shape learner attitudes and beliefs. Some of the limitations in the literature are that a lot of the data from these types of patient panels comes from just self-reported student satisfaction data, which tends to be pretty high, but we don't have a lot of long-term data. We haven't had any studies actually looking at whether this impacts patient outcome or clinical data. And it's really difficult to detangle this experience from all the other curricular elements. And Dr. Ahmed will talk a little bit later about what we do in our course, which is this is one piece of a much broader scaffolding. And I do think that it's important to measure, but not everything that is important can be measured. So how do we go about figuring out if there is an intervention that we're making that's planting a seed, but that seed doesn't really grow until a time point later? Maybe it's not to the end of the year or the next year or the year after. How are we accounting for that so we're not unnecessarily or preemptively getting rid of curricula that we need to be keeping and cultivating? So I wanted to pause. I see that we have some more participants here, and just see if anybody wanted to write in the chat or to even unmute themselves to give us your perspective on, how have you been able to integrate patients as teacher lived experience in your curricula? In what kind of manner have you been able to do it?
If you'd like to talk, just raise your hand and then I can unmute you. So just let me know. Thank you.
So Claire, I'm going to depend on you to let us know and to interrupt us if somebody unmutes or puts something in the chat that we'll address. Otherwise, we'll circle back to this towards the end. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ahmed, who's going to talk about how these lived experience panels got integrated into the curriculum.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Patel. Yeah, so considering kind of all of that, keeping all of that in mind, all the evidence, this is kind of what we did and how we kind of worked the idea of lived experience panels into an actual course. So you can go to the next slide. So the meta course is a course for first-year medical students that Dr. Patel and I were, co-direct. Dr. Patel actually started it about 4 years ago. So we have like a whole cohort now of medical students that have been through the course. So this is really the first course that medical students take when they enter their first year of medical school. And so it's focused around several different things. The main sort of pillars that we try to focus on in this course are clinical skills, cultural humility, personal wellness, and how to approach learning in medical school. So it's sort of an introduction to kinds of like all of the different teaching modalities students are going to encounter in medical school. It kind of tells them how learning in medical school is going to be different than learning that they've had in undergrad and things like that. And then we do a little bit of like basic clinical skill acquisition, and the rest is cultural humility. And you can see in the table here, this is kind of, we've broken down kind of how we teach cultural humility. And there are a lot of different components to it and a lot of ways that we introduce students to it. And lived experience panels are one piece of that. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are some of the other workshops that we have to introduce students to social determinants of health in the meta course. So we try to teach these tend to be more didactic sessions, but we try to make them as interactive as possible. For a lot of these students are in like small groups discussing some of these issues. But this is really where we kind of teach them what are social determinants of health. Why should they care about some of these things? How does that affect patient care? Kind of really going back to that first slide that Dr. Patel was talking about with, the upstream, downstream effects and those kinds of things to sort of give them the sense that these things are actually important and why they matter. So we talk about, the biopsychosocial model of care. So this is, when you're taking a patient history, eliciting things like, the context of their illness, how is this affecting their life, those kinds of things. Focusing on patient-centered care and how to conduct an interview in a patient-centered manner, teaching them what are social determinants of health, how to think about them. We talk about, adverse childhood events, knowing the community. So we actually have, Dr. Farr comes in and does a workshop with them about what resources are actually available in Galveston, where the students are going to have medical school and have like their clinical experiences. We talk about microaggressions as well. So yeah, this is really more kind of the didactic side, so they have kind of a general sense. And we kind of hope that these make the lived experience panels then more impactful for them when they have them in the course. Next slide. So we have a total of 5 lived experience panels throughout the course, and these are the topics. So there's patients dealing with chronic disease, incarcerated people, disability in medicine, LGBTQI+, and anti-racism in medicine, so people who have experienced racism in medicine. And we, really hope that getting to hear these patient stories will help sort of contextualize a lot of the social determinants of health and all of the teaching that they're getting in some of the didactic sessions and workshops that I mentioned on the previous slide. Yeah. So for recruiting panelists, this was something that we were very intentional about. So for each of these, we really tried to reach out to people in the Galveston community who are already kind of well situated to help us kind of curate panelists. So for our, for example, for our chronic disease panel, Dr. Christine Murphy, she's a pediatric specialist that specializes in pediatric illnesses that are going to, be chronic illnesses throughout these people's lives. And so she's really well kind of situated to plug us into some people who would be able to speak very well on that topic. And not just about, having chronic illnesses, but also from like a caregiver perspective. We have invited people to that panel who, are the primary caretakers of someone with a chronic illness. For the incarcerated people panel, lived experience panel, we have Leslie Stallnacker, who's the program manager for the School of Public and Population Health. So she's, again, already really involved in all of that and was able to help us connect with some great people. We reach out to student groups as well. So we have an Allies in Medicine student group on campus. And so that was a great resource for us for the LGBTQI panel. And then our Student National Medical Association, SNMA, they really focus on students who are underrepresented in medicine. And so we were able to reach out to them for some of the anti-racism in medicine panels. Next slide, yeah. So some things about logistics. So as we were kind of putting these together and having the panels, these were some of the things that we kind of ran into. So we held the panels as sort of a hybrid virtual in-person session. So what that means is that the panel took place on Zoom, and the panelists were not present in person. They were all, kind of logging in from their homes and respective places. We had and the students kind of had the option to log in on their own to the Zoom, but we also set it up in one of the big classrooms on campus, and we have the Zoom connected there. So they were welcome to come and sit in the classroom as well for the panel. We held most of these panels on Friday mornings, and we tried to sort of time them within the course, like I was saying, with some of the didactic sessions that dovetail with these lived experience panels. So like, for example, the microaggressions, we tried to time that before the anti-racism in medicine panel. So that students would have had a chance to kind of think about some of those things and then, come and hear the experience of our panelists. We also sort of did a combination of prepared prompts and student questions because we really wanted to keep the discussions going and have them be really valuable. So we wanted the students to have opportunities to ask questions, but also to have some kind of prepared things for the speakers to talk about, so that we were kind of, eliciting their perspective on things that were going to be helpful for our students to understand. We did have an optional debrief session following our anti-racism in medicine lived experience panel. And this was based on feedback from the students from previous years. They felt like this was one of the more kind of emotionally intense panels. And one of the things that was, they wanted some kind of additional debriefing time to process some of the things that were brought up. And then we also, I kind of would mention that we sort of timed a lot of these sessions so that they would coincide with our didactics well. And then we do a pre and post course survey as well with our students. We have like kind of a standardized course eval that all the students fill out, but it's really the same for all of their preclinical courses. And we really were interested to see a little bit more like granular data for some of the more specific things that we do in the meta course. So this is kind of outside of the like standardized course eval that UTMB does. And we asked them, so I have pulled out some questions that really focus on what we hope that they're taking away from the lived experience panels. And so they grade all of these things on sort of a Likert scale of how confident they feel in their ability to do these things before the course starts and then after the course starts. And so you can, sorry, the print's a little small, but some of the things that we ask them about are, their understanding of cross-cultural communication, understanding the needs of medically underserved people, understanding the social, economic, historical, political, psychosocial, and cultural factors that influence health of under-resourced communities, practicing patient-centered care, dealing with racism in medicine, dealing with microaggressions, recognizing unique challenges to the LGBTQI community. And, pre-course, most of the students kind of fell in this middle zone, feeling, somewhat confident in their ability to do these things. But after the course, there was, fairly significant shifts, and they were more kind of in this very confident zone. So we think that this really reflects their experience kind of learning about social determinants of health, and then also having that augmented by the lived experience panels. Next slide. So through our experience of kind of thinking about how we wanted to very intentionally teach social determinants of health and incorporating the lived experiences panel into the curriculum for this course, we've come up with, about 12 sort of best practice things, things that we've come up with to help anybody who's potentially looking forward to implementing a similar thing into their curriculum to help them do it well. So the first is to really be thoughtful about curating your panelists. Specifically, the goal of these panels is to have someone who's been through this experience to share their experience. And, it is just an N of one, like Dr. Patel was saying, and that's fine. I think it's important not to overly intellectualize and think about, we only want someone who has like a medical background or something. Like, actually, we want the opposite, right? Really, you want someone who is, sharing their experience interacting with the medical community, but doesn't have kind of like that insider knowledge of medicine. And there are some quotes here in italics from like the student comments from the course, and they really appreciate this actually. They liked that they, people had intersectional experience, and that they were sharing like their real life experiences with the medical field from a non-medical standpoint. So really having that kind of that fresh perspective, because these students are going to be kind of initiated in that kind of culture of medicine as they continue through their training. But this, we really wanted them to have a very kind of different perspective from patients who are navigating the medical field but don't have a lot of like this medical knowledge that the students are gaining. Next slide. Yeah, so the timing. So I talked a little bit about this in the logistics. Figuring out a good time for these sessions is important because ideally you want the students to be kind of fresh, focused, able to really pay attention and be, emotionally open to what the panelists have to say. And there were a few things that we kind of thought about. We picked Friday mornings because we were kind of wanting to have them, do like the didactic sessions earlier in the week and then come to these lived experience panels with a little bit of background knowledge. We chose the morning instead of the afternoon so that they would hopefully be a little bit fresher. Fridays at the end of the week still seemed like they were a little bit of a struggle sometimes for the patients, as you can see by this, for the students, as you can see by the comment. But yeah, we're tinkering still with that. I don't know that there is an ideal time of day. But some of the other comments we also got from students were about, if they had a busy day or if they've had sessions that were kind of a little bit emotionally draining or had kind of a heavy cognitive load, they felt less able to participate and be open to the conversations that were happening in the lived experience panels. So we tried to keep these kind of more at the very beginning of the day before the students had like a lot of fatigue. Oops. Yeah, so the next thing we felt was important for the success of these panels was creating conditions for vulnerability. Because really what we want is that, the patients, the panelists, and the students to really share their experience and be open. That's what makes these panels so valuable. And we tried to do this in a couple of different ways. The questions that we kind of curate, we really tried to be kind of open, very non-judgmental, and really, focused around eliciting the panelists' personal experience. And then we also, for the students, we would have them kind of write their questions if they did have questions in the chat, and we would moderate to make sure that, if we needed to rephrase something or something like that, to allow the panelists to respond very openly, we would, those kinds of things. One of the other things that was helpful, I think, in this, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, is the hybrid session. I think being able to have the students be able to log in virtually on their own if they chose, or in the classroom, like surrounded by their peers, I think was helpful. And then from the panelist perspective, a lot of them were able to log in from home, which I think also helped them feel more comfortable rather than sitting in front of like a lecture hall of 200 students. Yeah. And then this is also kind of going back to what Dr. Patel mentioned, this idea of seeing patients as their own experts. And this is something that, is not, I think, really explicitly taught to a lot of med students. You're kind of taught the medical knowledge and told like, yes, go and fix all of these problems now with these patients. And so, and it, for me, at least, I know it was much later in my medical education where this idea of shared decision-making and sitting down with the patient and kind of collaborating to develop a good plan of care was ever even brought up to me. And so that's one of the things that we really wanted to make a point of teaching with these lived experience panels. And so we wanted the students to realize, that these patients have been through so much and they kind of understand, they've learned a lot about their disease processes, they've, and how a lot of these treatments and things like that interact with their daily life, which make things, reasonable or not reasonable to do, regardless of kind of what you're taught in a textbook. And yeah, and the students do pick up on that. The other thing we liked in these panels was, allowing marginalized voices to tell their own stories. And I included this comment from a student because they picked up on this. In our anti-racism lived experience panel, we did have a student from the Allies in Medicine group come and speak about how you can be, an ally to people who are experiencing, like to your peers and people who are experiencing racism in medicine. And that was really kind of our goal with having that person as a panelist. But one of the students really felt like, because they were not a person of color, that they felt like they were not who they wanted ideally on that panel to speak to the idea of racism in medicine. And so it's important. It goes back to sort of the curating the panelists well. You want to make sure that you're getting panelists who really have that intersectional experience and can really speak from a very personal place about their experience. Okay, and then just kind of circling back to the idea of virtual sessions. After coming out of the pandemic, when everything had to be on Zoom per force, we all have so much Zoom fatigue that it's hard to think of this as actually being helpful. But and during this past year, I think we really tried to do as many in-person things as possible in the meta course. But we really did feel strongly that the lived experience panels, there were benefits to having it done virtually. The allowing patients to be in their own environments created this environment for vulnerability. If patients were having emotional responses to some of the things they were talking about, it was easier for them to kind of step away if they needed. We didn't record the sessions for privacy purposes. And really, from the student comments as well, they felt like this was having these as a virtual option was really something that actually enhanced the experience. And so it was one of the few things in the course that we really kept as virtual in this last iteration. I think I'll hand it over to Dr. Patel to talk about some of the rest of these.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. One of the other things that we learned was the need to keep the discussion moving. So as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, this is one of the reasons why we had prompts for the panelists that were really curated by the team that was leading that session and shared with the panelists in advance so that they could vet the questions, add questions, or even strike out questions. And there was active facilitation, usually by a member either of the community or by somebody that the panelists actually knew. So we many times it wasn't us as faculty that were facilitating the conversation. And again, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, we did curate the Q&A because we did need to redirect or reframe some questions. Sometimes students were very curious. For example, in our chronic disease panel or disability panel, wanting to ask questions that we really didn't think were appropriate, that we're getting more biomedical maybe cause of a genetic mutation instead of really focusing on the experience of the disease. So we had to really curate those questions. And you can see here that the students in their course evaluations, they mentioned the lived experience panels above and beyond any other curricular element, and it's been positively received. We also did a fair amount of preparation of the students beforehand, really priming the students for each session. Not only did they have didactics, but they also had assigned either readings, videos, coursework where they had to do reflective writing prompts as preparation for the lived experience panels. And then we also created norms for engagement for the sessions so that the students understood that there may be certain norms that we have outside in other types of sessions, but for these kinds of sessions, ensuring that the panelists feel comfortable as they're sharing very vulnerable experiences is of utmost importance. And that we do not censor or control what panelists say. So there may be certain things that they say that students may disagree with. So I think being able to prepare students beforehand and priming them to what to look for during those sessions was an important part to try to create this as a transformative experience. We also, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, did notice the need for debriefing sessions with the students. And this was based on the feedback that we got from the students on particular sessions. So some of this was formal debriefing sessions where students could come, or we could do it via Zoom if they wanted. One year we actually had counselors present during the session to check on students who may be struggling. So we've tried various different approaches for debriefing. And it's not only the students that we really need to prepare, it's also the panelists. So really ensuring that the panelists understand what the goal of this session is, who the audience is, that there may be biomedical pieces of their story that they want to share, but really focusing on their experience. And that we don't want them to share anything they don't feel comfortable sharing. And that this is somewhat of a, it's going to be an uncomfortable experience, and that we want to be kind of as protective as possible, and they can tap out anytime they want. So sometimes we will have panelists share their stories, do a Q&A, and then give them the ability to leave, so that they are not present for the rest of the debrief or discussion with the students. And then also debriefing with the patient panelists and the curators as well, to see, well, how was the session? Did it go according to your expectations? How was the experience for you? What did you think of the questions that were curated? Is there anything that we do need to change? To have them really inform that process and not just be participants of it. And we found from the first time that we implemented this, that the students really appreciated patients sharing their stories so much so that they wanted to have a mechanism to show their appreciation. So throughout the years, this has been done with thank you cards, with virtual cards, with kudos boards, with all kinds of things. But having some sort of feedback mechanism where the students are able to share kind of their impact back to the panelists, I think has been really impactful to the panelists, so that they see kind of the full circle of what their sharing of their experience has meant to the students. And this is also a quote from a panelist that kind of shared how much it meant to her to see that outpouring of support from the students as well. And part of what's critical about curating a lived experience panel is really having far reach within the local community, having a network outside of medicine, being able to leverage the relationships that you already have, whether that's with other faculty members, whether that's within academics or outside with local organizations as well. And not to cultivate them for the purpose of lived experience panels, but to look for opportunities where you can really have somebody that might be a leader in their community that is very outspoken, that you could also bring into this space. So I want to pause there. I know we have a couple of minutes to kind of solicit anybody's thoughts that's also on this call about what your experience of integrating these kind of lived experience panels has been. If you've had any pitfalls, lessons learned, or even other ways to incorporate patient voice into the curricula. Claire, can you let me know if there are any thoughts or comments, or anybody that wants to unmute and jump in there?
Yeah, just let me know and I will unmute you. I can just preemptively. moved it.
All right. Well, you can also put comments in the chat. There are plenty of other ways to incorporate patient voice into curricula as well. We have a community member on our meta course committee, and they are also involved in not only kind of vetting aspects of the curricula, but also in being able to look at things from kind of the community patient perspective as well. So that's something that I think has been really valuable for us as well. So definitely please let us know if you have any thoughts or comments. All right, if there are no questions, I will hand it back over to Claire. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much. I'm going to drop the link to the evaluation in the chat box right now. And please, if you don't already, follow us on Twitter. It's at @NU_NCEAS. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. We will get the recording up on our website, hopefully by the end of the week. But if you have any questions for the presenters, feel free to add them into the chat. And also we have our conference starting next week. And if you'd like to attend, let me put the link to the conference page in the chat box as well. If we don't have any questions for the speakers, I think we can wrap up. Thank you both again so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.